Welcome to the Terminology Leading Practices stream at SNOMEDCT Expo 2025. Thank you for TermHub for sponsoring this stream. My name is Kai Cooley. I'm the Implementation Support Technical Specialist at SNOMED International, and I'll be moderating today's session. We'll address all questions at the end of the presentation. For those in our online audience, please use the Q&A button to submit your questions to the presenter. For those attending in person, we'll use the microphone provided in the room when the time comes. It's now my pleasure to introduce Brian Carlsen from West Coast Informatics, who will be presenting Deploy 25 Terminologies in 5 minutes. Brian, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending the session. I can just advance that like this. I picked a title that I was hoping would grab some people's attention. So there's 2 small lies in the title, which we'll get into. One is that I'm going to take you on a journey of how to deploy a bunch of stuff. And the 5 minutes is really how long it takes to set it all up. But the final process to run itself takes a little bit longer than that. And the second one is, it says 25 terminologies, but really it's 25 terminologies or map sets or value sets, a derivative kind of terminology products. But there are 25 in total. So you get the idea. And this is intended to be something that at the end of this, everybody can kind of go try it out for themselves. And so we'll kind of get into it here. You know, this is all inspired by this idea of what is the easiest possible way to achieve terminology deployment? I mean, would it be possible to actually have just a single click and then you would have your terminologies up and running and available? Like, that would be the ultimate thing. So we've got it down here to, let's say, 6 steps from starting the process through being able to actually look at your content, the very content that you loaded, and using some user interface stuff and some technology, making it as streamlined as humanly possible. So first part, you need content. What are you going to load? Which terminologies are you going to pick? What mappings do you want to use? And what value sets do you want? So our product is called TermHub. You can go to Terminology Hub and sign up. And this is at its core a catalog of terminology resources. We're primarily focused on the requirements for terminology use in the US, but this sort of fundamental idea can be taken and expanded elsewhere. The ultimate goal of this is our terminology catalog. We will have everything that is relevant, that anything that looks like a terminology, all versions of it back to the beginning of time will be loaded. And so you can kind of choose the versions you want, multiple versions of things. You can do history kind of stuff, or you can just say, I want the latest of the current US CDI standards and click a button and move on. So obviously the first thing you have to do is log in. And then once you're logged in, we have this notion of creating a project. So we try to streamline this idea of how you choose the things that you want to interact with. The notion of TermHub, the sort of inspiration behind it was GitHub for any developer-friendly people in the room. But rather than creating a repository that would hold code, the idea was that you'd create a sort of repository that would hold terminology assets. And then that would become a thing that comes with an API, it comes with a browser, and it is deployable in a context, which we'll see in a little bit. So you go say, I want to make a new project. You make some choices. Here's just a UI of looking at choosing the latest version of the SNOMED US along with the maps to ICD-10 CM and a subset, in this case it's a value set that we create that calls out the specific extension concepts that are not part of the SNOMED core. So that's a thing you can easily ask questions about. I've gone through here and taken a screenshot. Once you've kind of assembled everything, you make all of your choices. The project setup is the part that really takes 5 minutes because you have a lot of choices to make if you want to get to 25 things. But we've tried to make this as easy as possible. So when you're choosing things, you just sort of like search for what you're looking for. And then you make your choices about whether, in fact, here you can see I have this latest thing checked. This idea is this is always pointing at whatever the latest version is. So when a new version comes out, it gets kind of automatically processed and brought in. And then when you come back in and use this again, it'll be pointing at the current version. So if you don't need to choose specific versions for regulatory reasons, you can just sort of always be accessing whatever is current. 25 things that I put into this demo are these terminologies that you see here, a few content maps, and a couple of value sets. If you add all of these things up, it does become 25. And in a way, it doesn't matter. The 25, 5, 50, the point is it's 5 minutes worth of work to choose the stuff that you want, and then we're going to use syndication to actually create the runtime container that is the deployment of everything. So there's one last piece that you have to do, which is configure an API key, and this is really just a kind of guided series of steps to show you what happens. And this is a way of saying in a deployment situation, when you launch a container, you tell it this piece of information, and then it goes and fetches content. So this is all based around the SNOMED syndication standard, which is about exposing a feed that tells downstream software what content is available, what format it is, what is it, how to get it, and as long as everything is properly worked out. So this functions as a kind of authentication mechanism also. You can only get this if you've logged in, and so this is only usable, it's tied to the kind of permissions that you have and the access to the content that you have. And so once this is all set up, this is a reusable thing, and then you can go ahead and you can deploy your terminologies. So step 2 is get something to deploy it to. So we have a open TermHub. It's a GitHub project. All of these things are going to be things you can go back and find later. But this is our runtime container. So it's an actual open source FHIR terminology server environment that's kind of built off of the work that we've done and our internal ways of representing terminology content, but exposing all of it as a FHIR API and then adding in layers to support our browsing use cases and other things. For those more technical people in here, this just runs as a container. It's a Docker image. And so here, we're just got a little bit of a command. I set the project API key up, choose somewhere where I want all of the data to live, and then I launch the container. And when this happens, the first thing that it does is use this piece of information to call out to the server and say, what is the content feed that's available? And that returns a list of these 25 things. And it begins just downloading them, unpacking them, and then loading them into the system with no effort required. This is kind of like the one-click part of all of this. And the idea is that you've made all the choices you want. Now you don't want to have to do anything else except make it run and then use it and interact with it. So that's step 2, is just launch it. Tell it some configuration information, start it up, and then you're ready to go. So this is it running. I said when it starts up, it fetches the feed. This is kind of what the feed looks like. Not going to get into the details of that here today, but really just to say it's all kind of automatic. And that's really the power of terminology syndication. And really syndication is at the core of all of this. Like all content, whatever it is, however many terminologies you need, however many maps you need, as long as there's a place where they exist and you can get the content you need, you can use this approach to kind of point something at it and it will just fetch all of it. Now, for people thinking about how long it might take to load a server when you first launch it up, that's a potential thing. So if it takes a half an hour or 40 minutes or an hour to actually load all the data into it, you don't necessarily automatically want to make that available and have people start calling it. So you can do things like preload, right? You launch this container, it loads all the data, you don't actually make it available yet. Then you package those things up, and then you put it into a production deployment context, and it has the data, and it has the service, and it's ready to go with essentially a minimal amount of effort. I tried to update this slide to show the 25 things, but I was an earlier version. So this slide is actually showing the browser. So when this finishes loading, so you go through the cycle, you choose your terminologies, you deploy the container, it fetches and downloads all the data, then you can immediately run a URL against that server and it has an embedded browser, so you can look at your content, the stuff that you loaded in. And you can see the terminologies with a kind of search capability and a report of the data. And you can also then, you see these map sets and subsets buttons in the corner that you look at the concept mappings and the value set data. And they have their own sort of browsers. And we threw in this bulk search thing here too, which is just a nice way to show like an extra feature. If you have like a list of terms from a spreadsheet and you want to just look them up all at once. And there are some fun extra features in this. There's an expression field, you'll notice under search concepts, it says enter expression or semantic type. So you can use ECL if you want to constrain bulk searches and things like that. So out of the box, you get something that you can point yourself to and look at, and someone can sort of play around with and interact with the content. But you also get a FHIR API that's documented, and so you can point to these things and look at how to interact with making programmatic calls to all of this. And this server It hosts for R4 and R5 FHIR APIs, and when there's R6, it'll do that as well. So just kind of, we're gonna not probably go back to previous versions of FHIR for terminology services, but we'll look forward. And so as future versions become officially balloted and accepted by HL7, they'll become available. And so you don't really have to do anything. The same content will serve whatever purposes, and you can just use it with a minimal amount of effort. So what are the great features of a terminology server? And in a lot of ways, that's actually really what this talk is about. So it's open source. I want to just make that point again. Like, we've decided to just make this open, so you don't have to use TermHub. You can find your own content. It'll load FHIR JSON code system files and things like that. So if you just want a container to play around with that's specifically geared to and built around terminology services, you can extend it, take it and do whatever you want with it, and just like classic open source. I think having a container that's runnable in your own infrastructure is key. Like, our product TermHub is really a cloud-first terminology service, but people don't always want to interact and send their data outside of a closed-loop system. So the other key point of deploying terminologies, it has to be something that runs within your own infrastructure, something that you can call within the boundaries of what you know is happening with the data, and nothing is being inappropriately shared out or otherwise exposed beyond the boundaries of what you want to define. This environment also has zero runtime dependencies on anything else. It doesn't need a database. It doesn't need an Elasticsearch instance. It doesn't need any other sort of Amazon or Azure or Google infrastructure to run. It's completely self-contained. You really don't, if you want to launch it completely on its own, it does not require anything else except for enough disk space to run. Subject to how much stuff you want to try to put in it. The more you put in it, the more it's going to need. Great terminology server should be fast, scalable, and have a low memory footprint, so you should be able to run it efficiently. You should be able to scale it to whatever level of usage you need. If you need to make millions of queries a minute, you just horizontally scale it, and it's stateless, and it just delivers the content according to your requests on the schedule that you need, and does not require any other special tuning to run at any level of scale. Personally, I think automatic content syndication is a kind of requirement these days. It should be as easy as possible to deploy terminology. You shouldn't have to go download individual sets of files in a variety of different formats and then find the right command to run the loader into the thing. That means take 25 hours to load 25 terminologies, or 5 weeks to load 25 terminologies, not 5 minutes. And then, of course, I brought this up earlier, but support preloading. So you also want a container that when you run the terminology server, it should be up and running. You shouldn't have to wait for a certain amount of time. Now, use cases have a lot of bearing on one thing or another. I was talking about being able to configure latest versions. So this particular server has a resyndication mechanism. So if you choose that one that says latest, what happens is it will serve the latest content, but it will check periodically to see if there's new versions. And if there are new versions of things, it will go fetch them and download them, and then turn off the old one and turn on the new one. So if you want to just kind of have a compatible, always current version of a selection of terminologies running with zero maintenance across time as terminology versions change, you can do that. And that is an important feature of a great terminology server, is if you don't want to have any overhead on doing the things that you want to do, you don't have to. You can just keep it running. Stateless, I brought that up earlier. I think the key to the scalability thing is saying there's no dependencies on anything. Like, every request is independent of every other request. And the server doesn't require any connections or dependencies that make it not able to seamlessly just be copied. I think, too, a great terminology server has a browser in it, so you can just look at the content. You don't have to call the API to see what codes are in there. You can search around and find stuff and look at the hierarchies and walk the relationships and explore the crosswalks and the mappings that you loaded and do all of that effectively. And you can imagine that a browser could, over time, include additional kinds of features that actually made it more functional than just a sort of lookup and introspection tool. And finally, standards are important, so there should be FHIR terminology APIs available, which this thing also has. So why does streamlined terminology deployment matter? Why is any of this important? I'm a believer. I love SNOMED. I think SNOMED is a top tier, probably most important terminology in the world, but most real-world use cases don't run on SNOMED alone. Interacting with healthcare data in the wild or in the real world requires a drug, at least extension, possibly the use of LINK for labs or other kinds of things like that. And so as soon as you get beyond deploying a single terminology, you get into this problem of being extra steps and there's more work and all this. So having all of that kind of seamlessly bound in a way that each thing that you're using is transparently handled in exactly the same way and you don't have to do different things to deploy all of these things, it really makes it a lot easier to even consider doing all of this. And as we know, different terminologies have different release schedules, they're published by different people in different formats, and this kind of smooths over all of that, so you don't have to worry about any of it. It just happens. And then also, there are different ways of interacting with terminologies depending on your use case. In many systems, you need to be bound to very specific versions for periods of time because those are the things that for regulatory reasons have to be there. And you need the capability to run it in that mode and then switch when you're ready to switch. But in other situations, more where you're just kind of exploring the content and you want people to be able to interact with it, just saying it's always pointing to the latest version might be fine. So that's an important thing too, is to not have to do anything to deal with versions if you don't want to. And then, of course, if you do have to deal with versions and you want to keep a system always up and running, you don't want downtime when there's version switches. So there has to be a mechanism to say, make the new version available exactly at the right time and make the old version no longer available without having to actually bring something down, bring something else back up, and do a bunch of intermediate work in the meantime. Couple other things here, like we talked about before, you should be able to have a system that can just scale to meet whatever the demand level is, and that's a sort of architecture question, but really is key in the use of a terminology server for actually like real-time scalable deployment scenarios. And you should be able to bring in your terminologies without needing specialty people who can go create the formats that you need. If it's all available in a catalog somewhere and it's all ready to go, it reduces the knowledge requirements to use terminologies that you may not have internal expertise in how to use. So I built this whole thing so you can try it yourself. I think Allison, oh no, it is here. So there's a video, I'm not gonna play the video, but it's embedded in the slides, so anybody who gets the slides later can watch the video, and the video kind of takes you through a series of steps of exactly how to do this in this environment. And then there's a QR code that takes you to a tutorial that has the video in it also. And so with this, you can follow along with the instructions. And what I want to do is encourage everybody who's interested to actually do this, or find someone on their team who would be interested in doing this, and go through the steps and see what it's like, see how easy it is to actually do this, and get something up and running that's a set of things that you care about in 5 minutes. And I'm actually going to just leave it on the slide in case people want to have a look at the QR code. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe. Just me being quiet.
Oh.
Is it working? Yeah, it's on there.
That's
okay.
on.
They turned me up, the sliders. Brilliant. Thank you, Brian. I know what I'm going to be doing after Expo.
Thank you.
Is there any questions in the room? There must be. Don't be shy. I've got loads, but I wanted you to go first.
Thank you for your presentation. Maybe it's a silly question, but I tried. How about the update? Because this terminology are often updated. So
yeah,
you do it, or we have to do it? Or?
Yeah, so in this environment, we do it. So when we onboard a terminology, we build a bridge to the content provider. So let's say ArcSNORM and SNOMED International are updated monthly, for example. So every time we have a scheduler that kind of calls out every morning and says, for the set of things that we are paying attention to, are there new versions of anything? And if there are, go fetch that data, bring it into the system and load it in so that all of the downstream services have those things available. And we're kind of in a phase right now of onboarding content, so we're going to be bringing more and more stuff on. And if there are things of particular interest that people would like to see in here, please let me know, because we're driving this through a combination of what our customers are asking for and where we kind of want to go in a direction of the use cases that we're trying to fulfill. But yeah, that's the idea, is you don't have to do that either.
Thank you.
Not a silly question.
Any other questions? I'm going to see if there's any online, and then I'll start my long list of questions.
Excellent.
There's none online. You've already talked about syndication, and that's really nice. Okay. What about performance? Like, you talked about performance and throughput, because you talked about horizontal scaling.
Yeah.
But depending on the size and the setup, it seems like something like this could be used as like a regional terminology server.
Yeah.
It could also be used as like a very close, reliable thing that you deploy on site in a hospital, right?
Yeah.
Like, which one are you thinking of, or is both applicable?
I mean, I think the performance question is part of that, what makes a great terminology server. And, that's part of scalability, is throughput and latency and performance are all have to be there. I don't think it matters what your use case is. Nobody wants to wait a second for a response to a query about a terminology thing. So as long as the response time of an individual request is suitable, and then that can scale to however many requests you want to make at the same time, that's the point. And that's kind of like the architecture is geared towards achieving that.
Can you give us a feeling of the response times, or like how many requests per minute it can deal with? I'm just trying to get a feel of, because it's a very new product.
Yeah.
It's kind of an innovative architecture and way it's deployed. If it's really fast and it can take a lot of requests per minute.
Yeah, I mean, we've done some scale testing of, 100 users making 100 requests in sort of around the same amount of time. And there's, it can handle that level of load. I mean, the performance does degrade with a single instance running, which is why the horizontal scalability thing addresses that. So, and of course it depends on how much memory you have. And so it's hard to say a definitive answer to that, but yeah, I mean, it's performant at a level that should support any realistic real world use case.
Thank you, Brian, for this marvelous presentation. I have a question. You said you're an American company and you've done it using American coding. My question is, in my country, Jordan, we're using the Veterans Administration VESTA system. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I am. We actually do work with the VA, so.
Okay, so my question is, have you integrated this system with the Veterans Administration?
I mean, at this point in time, we have not, but our core competency is exactly this kind of thing, which is onboarding terminology content from a variety of different sources. So, I mean, what's in our roadmap for the rest of the year is doing things like a VSAC integration to kind of make that content all available. But doing something with FES would be a reasonable choice. We're not going to do everything unless somebody wants it until we have time to do it. But that is the kind of thing that we could do, is bring in all those VHAT terminologies.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions in the room? No? Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. How hard is it to pull in some of the fringe terminologies? Like I'm thinking FDA tall man lettering, which is basically just a web page, or HCC categorization, which still is deployed using Excel spreadsheets. How do you handle stuff like that?
Great question. I actually just put HCC in there earlier this week. And I mean, it was very hard to find the data because CMS does not just publish a file, which I found shocking. But so that's a good point. I mean, for things like that, it is a little bit more work to turn it into a computable form. So we create a process that says for an outlier thing. Ultimately, what happens is we wind up creating something that is a representation that the system knows how to work with, and then we put that in, and then all the automation stuff happens. So with something like HCC, I mean, when there is to be a new version, we would, monitor that this was coming, and when it was available, we would find the data, and then we would essentially package it and make it available. That is not something we can do an automatic thing with, because there just isn't a consistent location where the archive of the data is available in a computable form or whatever. Yeah.
for something like the tallman lettering from the FDA, where there's no native versioning methodology with the terminology, can the versioning be handled inside of TermHub?
Yeah, I mean, John's really getting into it here. Yes, I mean, I think for us, we do both a version and a release date, because it's important to understand like relative in time, because versioning schemes, ArcStorm, for example, does month, day, year, which is, I find, an extremely awkward versioning mechanism. And so we have to just make choices, right? So we find the best information that we can, which is always not totally accessible, and we use that, but are prepared to correct it if there's ever, better information that we come across about why something is the case, yeah. So in the end, we'll just assign a version to it, even if we call it 1.0, because there's no other version information at all. Or typically we'll use a date, because it's just, at least then the version reflects the point in time that it came from, yeah.
All right, we're going to wrap up there and conclude the session. Thank you very much to Brian.
Let me just give one last point. So like UCOM is a perfect example of that, because it's not, like when is it a thing or whatever, and we build like a version of it that has a certain set of content as we kind of version it ourselves.
I need a hook to pull you off the stage. Brian's very passionate
Thank you,
about
everybody.
this stuff. That's brilliant. So feel free to... Thank you very much.